of fieldstone, and over the years it had settled and rotted out the floor, and we needed to do quite a bit of work. He built some buildings, moved some buildings, started cutting firewood, and he started pruning the spruces, and you will see that they're well pruned. And when the Scott family, a local family that owned most of Woodford and almost all of Glastonbury town, they decided, after they had clear cut everything, they sold it to the Forest Service, and the Forest Service contacted all abutting landowners and said, now's the time to straighten out your property boundaries, because once it's national forest, you won't be able to buy any. So my dad said, I'll take all you'll sell me. And they said, okay, that's 20 acres, basically doubling the property. In the late 90s, I was snowshoeing around with my dad, and I said, you know, when I retire, I was living in Alaska at the time. When I retire, I'd like to build my retirement home here on this property. And he mulled about it for a while, and a couple of years later said, okay, here's the deal. We'll start next summer. It's going to be a stone house, and I'll pay for it. So I really could not refuse that. We started building in 2001. I took a year off and moved back here for a year. I was not ready to retire yet. I was only 50. And so my parents moved in 2004. And after my dad passed away, my mom lived here alone for 3 years. And then in 2014, I retired and came back, and my mom still lives with me, and she turns 93 in 2 weeks on election day of all days. Okay, so where are we? This is the town of Bennington, Arlington. This is Route 9 going over to Wilmington. This little red splotch here is my land. It's on a road called Harbor Road that's right off of Route 9. And here's the property. Can you see my cursor?
Yes.
Oops. This is the house. This is the pond. These are our 2 solar panel arrays. This field down here is what we call the lower meadow, and I'll be talking about that as one of the stands. It's not a forest stand yet anyway. And you can see the darker green here and here, those are the spruce plantations. And this kind of thin part in the forest is the mountain meadow that I'll get to later. My dad called it that. And this is my dad, was my dad. He was a very energetic person. He was like a shark. He couldn't stand still for any length of time. So this is one of his favorite hobbies, was cutting firewood. And much of the stuff that was done to this land was him. As Kathleen said, we're in Tree Farm. My dad joined Tree Farm in 1987. And very shortly after I moved back in 2014, I got a call from Mary Sisak of the Tree Farm Committee saying, do you still want to be in Tree Farm? I said, well, I don't know. That's kind of how I got started on this voyage. And so this is the old Tree Farm sign. These are the new Tree Farm signs. And I apologize for putting it on the outhouse, Kathleen. And this is my dad in front of camp with my brother's dog. And the 1938 hurricane really hit pretty bad here. This side of the state, it was mostly rain and flooding. On the eastern side of the state, it was blowing down trees. But this was the driveway into camp after the hurricane. And it also cut a number of brooks that used to be on the surface. It cut them headward. And now we have a series of steep ravines that make it almost impossible to think about having a timber harvest on some parts of the land. So here's what camp looks like today. You can tell from the darker paint here that we had to take it apart, jack it up again, and put pressure treated sills. The sills had rotted out, and so we've sunk a lot of money into that camp. This is one of the buildings that my dad moved. My dad used to own a camp up on the top of Woodford, just past Prospect Mountain. And this is a little cabin that was starting to rot into the ground. And my dad would come up here virtually every day of the year, 360 days probably. And he'd come into this little cabin, which has a wood stove, light the fire, gas up the chainsaw, go out, cut a tank of firewood, and come back and feed the fire. And we spent a lot of very companionable time playing cribbage and drinking cocoa by that wood stove. This is a tool shed that we built from the siding. There is white pine that we cut and milled with an Alaska sawmill. This is a white pine of the same vintage, again about 90 years old now, and that's what we milled the boards out of. And this is a little carport that's just made out of slab wood. And now we're getting into talking about building the house. This is a local guy named Keith Giroux who has this wood miser. He's milling a piece of cherry right now, but all of the 2x4s and 2x6s that went into the new house and the board and batten siding were all milled on this machine, along with a lot of cherry for kitchen cabinets and paneling and some white birch. And this is the white, the stuff in the back is all cherry. The stuff on the right is yellow birch. And all of the lumber that we built the house out of, we just air dried it in the carport. My dad has had a number of quirks. One of them was that he really liked stone buildings. So anytime he would find a stone that had more than 2 flat sides, he would save it. And the woods around here were just filled with these little, we called them Irish hermit huts. And that's how he stored them. And then when we were building the house, the mason would say, "John, we need some more stone." And he'd take his pickup and go out and dismantle one of these. Oops. This is the start of the house. Notice that there's about a 9-inch ledge around the foundation. That's to hold the stone that will go on there. All of this lumber, except for the 2x12 headers, it was cut and milled on the land. And you can see that some of the spruces behind there, those are the spruces that they were cut from. And the carrying beam is on sawhorses here. This beam goes down the middle of the house and holds up the first floor. And here's what it looks like done. We decided not to go with stone all the way up. Thought that would have been a little too massive. But again, this board and batten was cut and milled on the property. And my dad said, "You know, we need a name for this." And I said, "Well, it's a stone house. Let's call it Stonehenge." And these are 2 pieces of cut stone from the graveyard that I was talking about. And we made a little Stonehenge. It's only about 2 feet tall, but that's our Stonehenge. And we have a number of standing stones as well. My dad had a thing for stone. There's the woodshed. I burn about 3 cords a year, but mostly heat with oil. This is the little pond that that my dad had dug, and another one of the buildings that was moved from up near Prospect. This is the stand map for my current use management plan, and it's kind of fuzzy, but this is stand 1, and we're going to go through these stands in order. This is stand 2, comes around to here. Stand 3 is out in here. Stand 4 is the largest. It's out here. The 2 yellow polygons are excluded. This is the mountain meadow and this is the lower meadow. And then the house site is outlined in purple. And so the main spruce grove and all of the houses are not part of UVA, which I think is mandatory. So the stands are, stand 1 is mostly Norway spruce. Stand 2, mixed conifer-Northern hardwoods. Stand 3 is beech and red maple, although there's quite a bit of red spruce regeneration. Stand 4 is Hemlock-Northern hardwoods, and I've already talked about those. So 3.5 acres of spruce plantation. There is quite a bit of wetlands, sphagnum moss, some feather mosses, several small, very small vernal pools, and also headwaters of a couple of brooks that salamanders breed in. And according to my current use management plan, it's overstocked and I need to thin it. But as I mentioned, access is a real problem because of these deep ravines that would need bridges built over them for a timber harvest that would not make any money. So my plan at this point is to cut them and leave them and let them become salamander habitat and woodpecker habitat. This is the boundary. On the right are some of the spruces, and our family oral history says that the Bill told my father that they planted the spruces 2 feet inside the boundary. So my boundary goes like right about there. And I walk the boundary every year and try to keep it open for line of sight. And so this is just demonstrating that. The property on the left-hand side is owned by the Boy Scouts of America. They used to have a camp there, but some local drunks burned it down. You can see that the spruces are pretty thick here, and very little sun gets to the forest floor. This flagging here has nothing to do with the thinning. It's marking a place where I pulled up a Japanese barberry, and I check it every year to make sure it hasn't grown back. My consulting forester is Mike White, who works for Alan Calfee, and I've had him mark this stand for both stand 1 and stand 2 for thinning. So that's what this blue dot here and here are. As I mentioned, there's a lot of wetland. This is mostly sphagnum moss in here, and it's good amphibian habitat. And was there a question? Okay, and the wetlands are back in this dark part here, and there are a number of brooks. Here's one, there's one right here that drain that wetland. So again, it just makes it a little bit more difficult to have a timber harvest.
Jock, during the summer, is that all dry in there, or is it pretty wet most of the year?
It's pretty wet most of the year, especially when you're getting up into the wetland part. The brooks occasionally will dry up, but it has to be a pretty dry year. And this year they did. They did dry up.
And so Jock, is that enrolled in current use, the wetland, or is that a ecologically sensitive
It
area?
is not yet an ESTA, but it will be. And that was on the recommendation of Corey Cregan, who is the person that's going to have to sign off on it. So I have a pretty good hunch that he'll approve it.
Okay.
So I have contacted Mike White that I want to set aside that amphibian wetland habitat as an ESTA. And next time he's down here, we're gonna work on delineating it.
Thank you.
Back in the day when, if there were any regulations about stream crossings, we didn't know about them. We would, my dad would make these corduroy roads through the brooks. And these are some that are quite old, probably at least 40 years old, but they're still there. This one's pretty moss covered, but signs that my dad was using the forest. We actually cut quite a bit of the, or not quite a bit, some of the spruce and built a little 12 by 14 log cabin out of it. As I mentioned, there's a couple of vernal pools. Two of them are not actually on my property, but they're within 10 feet of it, and I'm going to claim them. And I know that the amphibians breed in them. Right here is a spotted salamander egg mass. And here is a couple of wood frog egg masses with another spotted salamander egg mass right here. But this picture was probably taken on about the 5th of May before we had that snowstorm. And this was May 31st. So I don't know if any of the tadpoles actually metamorphosed and went out into the real world, or if it dried up too fast. But hopefully in a wetter year, they will mature. And I have seen a number of adult, both spotted salamanders and wood frogs. Okay, moving into stand 2, it's a little bit larger. The mixed conifer part of the stand is mostly the spruce. It's not as good land, so the spruce didn't grow as well, but it's got hemlock, red maple, yellow birch, a bit of black cherry, and more beech than I care for. I've been thinning it for firewood, and I have probably another year's worth of firewood to cut that Mike marked for me. But the softwood, again, I'm going to either girdle or fell. I'm probably going to fell most of it, leave a few as snags for the woodpeckers and chickadees. This is I mentioned that my dad was kind of person that always had to be doing something. Well, this is a road that he built with 5-gallon buckets of gravel. He calls it the stone road because of the stone that he lined it with. But this is stand 2, and I'm standing on our driveway now. So this is the main access for me to get in there to haul firewood. And this, I'm on the stone road looking up at the house. I'm using, for identifying what to cut, I'm using crop tree release, which is where you identify what trees you want to save, and then you release them by cutting any trees that the canopies are touching. So I have blazed with this blue flagging the crop trees in this stand, and this is a yellow birch. And here's a black cherry that's flagged as a keeper, another black cherry, and this is a red maple that's flagged to be removed because it's competing with this cherry. Unfortunately.
How many, sorry to interrupt you, how many crop trees might you have in an acre?
It depends on how big they are. And I haven't actually tried to count number of trees per acre. I just look up, and
Oh,
if the canopies are intertwined, it's time to remove a competing tree. There are methods using a 10-factor prism of estimating the amount on an acre, but I'm not a forester and haven't done that.
great.
The
Thank you.
next time Mike does my management plan, I'll have better numbers on that.
Thanks.
You bet. And in the background, you can just sort of see that's a very deep ravine there, which was cut by the flooding during the hurricane, and really makes it hard to think about getting a skidder or a forwarder in there. So here's a crop tree. It's probably a 18-inch yellow birch. Here was a competing tree, which was a red maple, and it was probably 20, 21 inches in diameter. And at the time, before I had really talked to any foresters about it, I was thinking red maple's just kind of junk. And it really bothered me to cut down this tree that had no branches for 40 feet. And then Kyle Mason came up and walked the land with me, and he said, yeah, there's a market for red maple. They use it for flooring. I said, oh, damn. Well, I've burned it already. So this is the kind of stuff that I'm doing for thinning this stand. And here's some of the remnant spruce that are marked. This is in stand 2. And you can see some of them have been falling on their own. And we have been having quite a bit of windstorms around here, and this root wad went over and took out 4 trees, one good-sized spruce and a couple of smaller ones, and then it hit this one that's bent on the way down. And this is the backside of that root wad. And we've lost, in the 6 years since I've been back from Alaska, I'd say at least a dozen trees to wind.
So Jock, are you finding ground nesting birds in those root
No, but
balls?
Andrea Shortsleeve said, yeah, what is it, winter wren?
Uh-huh. Oven birds are on the ground. There's a couple that nest in those.
I think it's a wren
Uh-huh.
that is a specialist on these root wads. I think it's called a winter wren.
Okay.
I'm not positive. But no, I haven't actually seen them. But I'm also not really a birder.
Uh-huh.
So stand 3 was logged, so it does not have to be thinned. And stand 3 and 4 have pretty good access, so a skidder can get in there. But I think that it was high graded when it was last logged, and so there's not much good quality stuff in there. And because a lot of it was beech, there's a lot of root sprouts and stump sprouts of beech coming up. So I often just take a pair of loppers and walk out through the woods cutting beech saplings or seedlings. Not seedlings, but sprouts. Things that I think of as crop trees, which is basically everything else except for hemlock. I try to release them, cut any trees that are shading them too much, prune them up as much as I think that they can stand. And as I say here, there's quite a bit of red spruce regeneration coming in also. As I mentioned, I bound on the Green Mountain National Forest. This is the blaze of the surveyors for the Forest Service. So this is my property boundary. And again, you can see that I've kind of cleared line of sight as much as I can without cutting trees on the national forest. And this is just a typical shot in stand 3, mostly fairly young trees. A lot of them are the junk, the crooked trees that were left after high grading. You can see a number of 2-foot tall stems here. Those were beeches that I cut down. And here's another view of it. You know, it's quite a bit of regeneration. A lot of it's beech, a lot of it's red maple, but there's some oak and yellow birch in there too. So here's beech stump sprouts or root sprouts. That's what I walk around cutting. Here's a sapling that I cut, and you can see it tried to grow around the cambium there, but it's not going to make it. My dad really didn't like hemlock, and so he girdled a lot of hemlocks, and this is the result of a girdle that he did. This may actually be one that survived the girdle. The forester that did our management plan in 2012 said that about 45% of the hemlocks that my dad girdled actually survived, which I thought was pretty amazing. They're a pretty rugged tree. I now only cut them when they're shading a tree that I want. Like this oak. This is a red oak. You can see my blue flagging right here. And this is a typical size of the oak regeneration that I'm trying to encourage. And here's a yellow birch next to it. Okay, stand 4 is the largest, almost 15 acres. It was also logged at the same time and also high graded because it's kind of darker, colder. It doesn't have as much regeneration, doesn't have as much beech either, because it's just not good beech habitat. And I've been basically treating both of those stands pretty similarly. And here's looking one direction that's mostly hardwoods. Here's fairly mixed hemlock and spruce and hardwoods. And then here's the mostly conifer portion. And you can see here's some young red spruce, and here's another one. Quite healthy regeneration. So something like this or something somewhat bigger, I would start pruning the branches up from the ground for a couple of reasons. One, it'll make a better log in someday, but also because snow gets on those lower branches and often will bend a sapling right over. So I try to prune them up high enough to keep that snow from damaging the trees. And here's another red oak, oops, that is regenerating in stand 4. And there's a pretty good understory. This, I'm pretty sure is blueberry. And so this, Kathleen, would be where I would expect to look for an ovenbird nest in ground cover like this.
Yeah.
Okay, those are the 4 stands that are actually part of current use. And my dad, the 2 yellow polygons on that map, he excluded from current use. I think he excluded the mountain meadow because he thought that maybe another one of his kids might want to build a house someday. So it's 2 acres so that it could have a house on it and still conform to UVA. But also he and a friend of his cleared this meadow out of the forest, you know, kind of like the pioneers did. And I kind of think of it now as a monument to my dad. So I'm keeping it open. Um, One of my management philosophies is to have as much diversity as I can. I know that 40 acres is really not enough to have that kind of diversity. Like I'll never get bobolinks, but I figure a couple of acres of more or less grassy, you know, the deer and the bear like it. Also within the mountain meadow, my dad wanted to have, mostly he started with butternut and walnut, but we started calling it the nut plantation because we tried chestnut and black cherry as well. The cherry, we germinated the cherry and then planted it, but I think probably the rodents ate it all that winter. As I say, the nut plantation never worked. Walnut and butternut both need full sun, and the oaks very rapidly overtop them. And I'll show you a picture of a black walnut that's 40 years old and about 1.5 inches in diameter. And the meadow got heavily invested with buckthorn. I don't think my dad had invasives on his radar, but when I came back in 2016, I had a lot of work to do. And there's some apple trees there. This is where the cemetery was. And yeah, so here's the meadow. The nut plantation is just down the hill past the edge there. There's a number of apple trees right up in here and a couple more out of the picture down below. It looks quite open when there's no leaves, but once the summer comes, it looks a lot more grown in. I wonder why that is. These larger trees here are white ash that are not in very good condition and will probably be firewood before too many more years. But the oaks are very healthy. This is about an 18-inch in diameter oak, and I've got quite a few of them on this particular stand.
Chuck, do you have EAB down there?
I don't yet. It's close, and I'll talk about it a little bit towards the end.
Okay.
So this is a walnut tree that's about 40 years old, and this is the top of the canopy right here, and this is the stem. So it's obviously not very good growing conditions for walnut. But my dad's attitude was, well, it's the only place I got. Let's give it a try. And in the early 90s, when the American Chestnut Foundation was headquartered in Bennington, I got my dad a membership, and at that time they were giving 20 chestnuts as part of an inducement to sign up for a membership. So we planted these 20 chestnut seeds, and most of them grew. But the blight is still here. This is a dead stem. Oops. This reddish one is a dead stem. This is a dying stem, and this is a new shoot, all coming from the same stump. And here's a typical blight-infected chestnut with all these little shoots coming up. And this is the largest of the chestnuts, which died, but it probably made it to 10 inches in diameter. And this one you can see, here's a new shoot that's actually still alive. So I need to contact the Chestnut Foundation and find out is there anything I can do with these, or should I just cut them down? But they're kind of a conversation piece, so I keep them so far. As I mentioned, we have some apples. A lot of them, I mean, this all used to be complete forest, so they were completely overshadowed. mostly by ash. This is an ash in the background here. But there's 4 big trees and several small ones in this little clump. And there's another small one over here. And I've been gradually releasing them, cutting the trees that are shading them. And in a good year, they'll produce a lot of apples. They're little tiny sour apples that are only good for deer and bear, as far as I'm concerned. But that's why I do it, for the wildlife. This is another one a little bit farther down the hill. The other ones are up at the far edge of that meadow. And I mentioned the cemetery. The cemetery used to be surrounded by 6 large sugar maples that have all succumbed. And this log right here is one of those sugar maples, and the burying ground was right in this area. There's a snag that's hard to see through the twigs, but that's also one of those sugar maples. And just a cute picture. This is my dad. He's carrying the flats that we germinated the black cherry seeds in. But the point of this picture is that in 2002, while we were building the house, a tornado touched down here in Woodford, which is the only tornado I've ever heard of in the state of Vermont. But the Weather Service said it was a Category 1 tornado. So I believe them. And unfortunately, most of the trees that got knocked down were black cherry. But I think a number of them are now kitchen cabinets in our house. Just another picture of the trees that got knocked down. These are not the same ones that my dad was standing on. I think we lost about 25 good-sized trees. Okay, the lower meadow is what my dad used to call the fill, because the Bennington water supply is just up the road from us. There's a small pond that collects water into a pipe, which flows down to a settling tank that's down at the bottom of my driveway. And periodically they have to dig out that little pond on the brook. And for years, my dad was having them dump it in this, what used to be wetland. I don't know if it was officially a wetland, but it was a wet area. And his philosophy was that was reclaiming land. I have 180-degree opposite definition of the term reclaim. To me, reclaiming is rebuilding the wetlands. So anyway, when he passed away, I stopped them dumping fill, and now I'm letting it. My dad used to mow it, and I'm letting it grow up. I want to have early successional habitat there. And again, 2 acres of early successional habitat is really not enough, but my philosophy is diversity. So I'm going to do it. So this is what it was like when my dad was still mowing it. You can see there's some piles of stone way in the back there that just hasn't been flattened out yet. That's where they were dumping the fill. And I'm actually standing on our driveway, so that it's down at the bottom of the driveway. And this is what it looked like this spring before things started growing. We'll be talking in a little bit about Japanese knotweed. This is the Japanese knotweed infestation I have. And then once the goldenrod grows up, this is what it looks like. So it's starting to come in. This is an aspen, and this is a black locust, and there's some sumac saplings starting to grow in it. And as I'll show in the next slide, this is actually mint. Mostly it's goldenrod, but we have, I have no idea where it came from, but you drive a 4-wheel across it and it smells like a mint julep. So if anybody needs any mint, I got lots. And then stand 7 is the house site. It's excluded from UVA. It's about 4 acres and it includes the house and the camp. And the way I understand it is that any building that has a bed in it you have to exclude 2 acres for every building that has a bed in it. So that's what we've done. And the best of the Norway spruce is in this stand. It's not really a stand, but this is the spruce grove. We're standing right near the house looking down towards camp. There's camp. And my dad has pruned all of these trees up as high as he could reach on a 30-foot extension ladder. Kyle Mason, the former county forester here, would just walk into this grove and look up and go, I have never seen a plantation stand like this. And in fact, that was part of the same conversation that he said, you know, you should be on the tree farm committee and you should write an article about your house. So I did both of those. Again, here's the spruce trees pruned up 35 feet. This is Howard Smith and Roland Smith and Kyle Mason. Okay, does anybody have any questions about the forest before we move on? Nope, guess not. Local wildlife, there's nothing new here. I had a game cam. This is out in the mountain meadow. These are some of the ash that I have removed to unshade the apple tree. This is an apple tree here. And so deer have been using it. Black bears have been using it. That's a black bear. And there's those ashes and the apple tree. I had my game cam set to take 3 pictures. So this was the best one. The next one he's over here, and then the next one he's over here.
And Jock, why do you leave the stumps that high?
My philosophy at the time I cut those was to leave at least 16 inches because I cut my firewood at 16 inches. And so I would have gone back and cut one more round of firewood off of that, but I never did. And now they're a little more rotten than I want to burn. And that's for ash, but for beech, I got this paper from a friend who did the management plan, Bob Ott, Andrew. He sent me a paper about getting rid of beech, and the paper said that if you cut them 2 feet above the ground, they will not sprout root sprouts. If you cut them down at the ground, the physiology of the plant is different and they will send up shoots. So when I'm cutting beech to release other trees, I generally cut them about 2 feet tall.
Oh.
Another reason that I do that when I'm cutting invasives is that if I do a cut stump treatment and it doesn't take, then I can just go down 6 inches and do it again the next year.
Yep.
So
Interesting.
it's just kind of the way I've developed my habits. That I actually did take that picture and with a little point and shoot, and that guy is no more than 20 feet away from me, but not threatening at all. You can tell he's kind of looking sideways at me or at us. He's just unsure of what we're all about. So local birds, we have a number of bird feeders. Actually, this year is the first year we didn't put them out in the summer. But got at least one pair and sometimes as many as 3 pairs of barred owls. I can hear them hollering at each other across the valley. And this was actually taken off my deck. Woodpeckers, this is a pileated excavation. Number of wildflowers. Oops. So this is an azalea that the local name is swamp pink, and we have 3 fairly good sized bushes of it. Trillium. I can go through these because you've all seen them, I'm sure. Trout lily, or some people call it adder's tongue. Dutchman's breeches. Spring beauties. Hobblebush. Lilacs. These are the planted ones. As I said, my dad kind of had a fetish for stone. He built 14 stone walls on this property. This is one of them, or actually a couple of them.
Does your I think you said your mom was still with us.
Yes.
Are there certain areas that she particularly loves?
Well, because she doesn't walk that well these days, we have a trail that kind of goes around our pond, and she'll take a couple of ski poles and walk around the pond for her exercise. But in the past, when she was more mobile, yeah, I can't think of any place specifically, but she would definitely walk around the property quite a bit.
Fun.
But she's doing pretty good for still being able to walk around the pond.
Yeah.
I think that probably Nan Brasted planted this rhododendron, and I think it's probably about 30 feet across, 15 feet tall. It's a big guy for around here. And we've planted a bunch of daffodils, these little tiny guys. And I just want to mention that if you're in the invasive killing mode and you've got honeysuckle, make sure that it's not the native honeysuckle. This is a native honeysuckle, and the way you can tell is you cut the stem. If it has a hollow pith, if there's a hole down the middle of the stem, it's invasive. The local native has a solid pith, no hole. And I have at least 3 of them on my property. I had 4, but a biologist who shall remain nameless thought she was doing me a favor and pulled it up, pulled up one of them. I said, wait, don't do that. Oh, well. And invasives, I've got 17 species, although I include 3 that are not on the VT invasives: bindweed, burdock, and coltsfoot. But mostly I think I've got them under control. The ones I don't are buckthorn, knotweed, and garlic mustard. Buckthorn mainly because there's so many seeds in the soil already that and all of these shrubs here are buckthorn. And again, this is the tree that used to be around the burying ground, the cemetery. These I cut high because I cut them in the winter and there was that much snow. But when I saw what they do, I thought, oh, I don't want to cut those down at ground level and just have them sprout out like that. So that's part of the reason I cut at least invasives high. And then here's after I've treated them with a cut stump treatment. And those, I'm just going to let them rot. And this is a buckthorn seedling. So now that I've cut most of the woody, I, as far as I know, I've cut them all. But because they keep sprouting, I have a trash can out there in the mountain meadow, and I just walk around filling up a handful of seedlings, pulling them, put them in the trash can so that they won't reroot somewhere. And I do that for a few hours, I'd say maybe 8 or 10 days throughout the summer. So I probably put 30 or 40 hours into pulling buckthorn each summer. This is my buddy, Japanese knotwood, or as my friend Andrew calls it, Boston bamboo. And it's a small infestation. It's probably only about 10 feet by 6 feet. And Andrea Shortsleeve wrote an article on BT invasives about this technique she heard about for getting rid of knotweed. You put 1/2-inch hardware cloth down, the shoots grow up through it, and as they expand, they girdle themselves. And it does work. These are stems that have girdled themselves and fallen over. You can see the hollow stem right there that one came from, and then there's a hollow stem right there that one came from. The problem is that they also send up smaller shoots, and this was plan C for me, and I think I'm on to plan D now, and that's just cut them every year, burn them, and eventually they'll run out of energy. And garlic mustard, I would imagine many of you are familiar with garlic mustard. I do massive garlic mustard pulls in the spring. And this was a new infestation that I hadn't realized I had. The knotweed, it's just right next to the knotweed. But now I've got my eyes on it. Hopefully I will take care of it. And this is an example of ones that I kind of have under control. This is the only plant of purple loosestrife that I've ever found. I pulled it up by the roots, never seen it again. And that was 3 years ago, maybe. And the same with Japanese barberry. I've pulled several of them. Anyway, most of my invasives are under control. Now, I do have some forest diseases: beech bark disease, butternut canker, chestnut blight, and ash yellows or ash decline, which is a very vague term meaning your ash aren't doing very well. So here's an example of beech bark disease. It's a fungal disease caused by a fungus called Nectria, and the vector is a scale insect which pierces the bark and infects it. And so these are all blisters that have grown up around one of those infection spots. And eventually the tree rots to the point where it will fall over, and often that's 10 or 12 or 15 feet above the ground. And this is a beech tree that has succumbed to that. Sick trees often will send up root sprouts. So because virtually all of my beech is infected, it's sending up incredible amounts of root sprouts. And at one point, I was looking through stand 3 and thinking about, okay, I'm gonna try to foster any regeneration that I can, and all I could see was beech, and I got pretty disgusted. So I've kind of been on a mission to reduce the amount of beech. And because I took the coverts training, I now stack the the cut stems into a pile so that small wildlife can use it. Back when my dad and I were doing forest management, although we didn't even call it that, we would drag these to a pile somewhere and burn them. But I don't do that anymore because it's easier to just leave them in the forest. This is one of the butternut trees, and you can see successive years of canker killing it. And here's yet another chestnut with the blight. This is also chestnut here, this yellow orange or yellow green. So they are still sending out healthy sprouts, but they just don't live very long. And this is what a lot of my ash trees look like. And I've had both Kyle Mason and Mike Paricio look at these, and they've both said, no, that's not emerald ash borer. It looks like the woodpecker flecking they talk about, but no, it's just an ash tree that's not doing well. And so ash borer has been found about 8 miles from my place in Stamford, and Hemlock-Woolly adelgid has been found on North Mason Hill in Pownell, about 12 miles away. So they're coming. And this is not up to date. There's now an infestation in Rutland County. But my house is in this yellow right in here, about 8 miles. These circles are, the red circles are 5-mile diameter. The orange circles are 10-mile diameter. So I'm about 8 miles from this Stamford infestation. They call this the fried egg map. And this is Mike Paricio, who was a great addition to Forest Parks and Recs, but he only lasted about 9 months. And we are setting up what's called an ash trap tree, or an EAB trap tree, where you wait till the tree is leafed out or almost leafed out. You girdle it and it gets stressed. It sends out, they aren't really pheromones, but the insects can detect a stressed tree, and if they're going to hit anything in the area, they're going to hit that tree first. So then in October, you cut it down and you peel the bark with a draw knife and look for larval galleries. And I did not find any. So I think I've got a couple more years. As long as it's not being transported as firewood, the insects fly 1 to 2 miles a year. And there's a fairly good sized ridge in between me and Stamford. So I'm hoping I've got 4 or 5 more years before it hits here, because I do have quite a bit of ash trees.
Jock, do you know where they are in Rutland County now?
If you go on the VT invasive site,
Okay.
and then click on update for EAB, you can get to the map there.
I think it's West Rutland.
Okay. Thank
Yep.
you.
And this ash tree was one of the ones shading an apple tree, and I was going to cut it down anyway. So, and I have 3 or 4 more that are shading the apples, so they're going to do double duty over the next few years as detection for EAB, and also opening up the apple trees. Also on my land is a hiking trail. It's a spur of the Long Trail, blazed in blue. The trailhead is right in my driveway. This summer, I've had as many as 16 cars parked down by the lower meadow, and it's getting, I suppose it's mostly because of COVID, but it's getting to the point where I'm not happy with that much traffic. And I don't know, my dad granted a right of way to the Forest Service for the trail, and I don't know how involved it is to revoke a right of way. I'm not there yet, but I've been thinking about it as they do donuts on my lawn. So here's the trailhead, and it goes up this short driveway that goes up to the camp of my neighbor, and then it goes into the woods. And when it leaves my property, there's a trail registration form and a "You Are Here" map, and "You are going into wilderness" sign. And I think that's it. So that's my land.
Wonderful presentation, Jock. Thank you.
Thank you.
Great.
I have a lot of
Great.
fondness for this land, and I love to show it off.
We can tell.
Yeah.
What's your vision, Jock, for the next, or 5 years, 10 years? What do you love to think about doing on it?
Well, it's kind of interesting. I'm in a position that most landowners, forest landowners, are not in that my grandparents have only one grandchild, and that's my sister's son. And he lives in Portland, Oregon, and has no intention of moving to the East Coast. So there are no heirs to take the place over. I had been thinking along the lines of, all of this stuff I'm doing, pruning small trees that, it's going to be 50 years before they can be harvested. My intention was to do that for Max, because he's the one that's going to inherit the place. But, it's kind of a little amorphous now. I don't really know. And I've come full circle and decided that I'm just going to keep doing what I'm doing. He's going to inherit the place, and if he wants to sell it, he can sell it. But I'm just, I've told Kathleen that kind of my retirement goal has been to try to leave the Vermont forest better than I found them. So that's kind of what I'm doing.
Yeah.
And invasives is a big part of that.
Yeah.
I'm trying to keep the invasives under control on my land. And
you are doing that, making the forest better than you found it, for sure. And that is, that's kind of the thing about tree farmers. They are landowners who have made a commitment to extraordinary stewardship, because that's really what they want, is to see the forest better than they found it.
Stewardship is the best word for it.
Yeah, for sure. And we have in Vermont 450 tree farmers. So they are definitely a group, a small group compared to the number of forest landowners who have made that commitment to stewardship. So you are in good company as a tree farmer with those 450 other landowners, and anybody who wishes to join would be in good company as well.
Yeah, and since we have a little bit of time, do you want to talk a little bit about woods wildlife and warblers? Well, actually, probably most everybody here knows about it already.
That's possible. Yeah, I mean, it is a program of the Vermont Tree Farm Program, Audubon Vermont, and American Forest Foundation that is helping landowners who may be not managing landowners, unengaged or underengaged woodland owners who are actually encouraged to do things on their land when they realize that much of what we do to manage our forests creates bird habitat. and that Vermont, especially southern Vermont, there are huge forest blocks that are contiguous, and they are home to many of our migratory songbirds who come from the south each spring, and this is where they nest and have their babies. It's kind of a breeding bird habitat here in Vermont. And the more landowners we can have engaged in managing their woods with birds in mind, the better off those bird populations will be. So,
And it's not just birds, it's, you know, if you manage for birds, you're managing for fisher, you're managing for deer, you're managing for bear.
absolutely, for all wildlife and for the health of the forest.
Yeah.
I mean, you know, birds are the one thing that you see more quickly when you've done something right.
And you see it quickly when you've done something wrong too.
There is that. Yeah.
Why aren't there any birds here?
Yeah, birds are kind of an indicator of work done well, and they will reward you within a year or two by finding that habitat you've created for them. So,
and part of this program is that anybody who's interested can sign up for a visit from either a biologist or a forester or a peer landowner. And I've been one of those peer landowners 3 times now, where I just go walk the woods with the landowner and just talk about stuff. And some people aren't ready to have a representative of the government there, like a biologist or a forester, but they are receptive to another landowner.
That is true. That's true.
So
and our biologists, the folks we work with, are from Fish and Wildlife, and they are happy to come walk your land with you. The foresters are predominantly consulting foresters, and Steve Hagenbu is with Audubon. So we have a variety of ways that we can engage with landowners. And you can go to that website, VT Woods and Wildlife, and actually request some information and a visit.
So I have a question. This is Bill. And
Hey, Bill.
How are you?
Good.
I am an example of a person you came and walked around with.
Yeah.
And that was a lot of fun. That was very good. And you actually, I was deep into common buckthorn, and you acquainted me to glossy. I've been pulling it ever since.
Yeah.
Including today, yesterday, and the day before, and the day after. This is a great time of year to see it.
Yeah, because it loses its leaves much later than the native fauna or flora.
Yeah, and you know, actually, I'm pretty excited to see how many people, when you start talking about invasives, they pick up their ears and they're interested in it, and I think many of us have a lot to learn still about best way to go. I just go for the roots. I got such a small piece of property, I can, you know, enjoy my come along work and things like that. But here's my question for all of you who are connected to the forestry world, is that I really border right on state land, you know, the South Stream Wildlife Management Area. And it is full of invasives. It is the source probably for an awful lot, because, you know, I think so much what we're dealing with is, you know, farmland that was let go, and for so long, I think we just assumed it would turn into a beautiful forest, and it doesn't exactly work that way, does it?
No.
No, you gotta, you know, it needs a helping hand, hopefully a wise one. So I'm just wondering if you have any contact. I've written to Lewis Porter and I've said, hey, do you mind if I pull him right along my border? And no answer. Wrote him again, no answer. Wrote him, basically said like, well, with no answer, I guess you don't mind.
The person I would contact would be Travis Hart.
Is Travis local?
He's in Rutland.
Yeah.
Yeah, they pretend that's local down here in Pownell.
Oh, he's been down here a number of times. He's walked my land twice.
Yeah,
And he was instrumental in the Whipstock Hill Wildlife Management area. And he and the new herp guy came down and oops,
yeah.
ignore that
But-
phone.
That's okay. And I guess what I'm saying is I'd really like to see the state show some leadership in terms of cleaning the invasives out of the public land that the public sees a lot, just to send the message and to say it can be done.
Yeah.
And, you know, to forge the partnerships, whether it's the use conservation folks or people who would like to volunteer and get out in the woods.
Mhm. So Bill, is this fish and wildlife land? This is a wildlife management area. It's not owned by
Yep.
Forest and Parks.
No, it's WMA.
It's a WMA. Okay.
And so, yeah, it's wild, you know, it's one of those places you can launch your boat and it's set up for duck hunters and
Mhm.
especially and fishermen, but it's not a park.
Okay.
And yeah, they don't have many resources. I know that all too well. But you know, it'd be good to move it up the priority list and at least to say
Yeah.
this is what we do here in Vermont.
Yeah, I agree with that. Invasives are a huge problem all across the state. They are worse in the south. They are moving north, and
Yeah.
and they are detrimental to the health of our forests going forward. I have not worked with anybody at Fish and Wildlife on invasives, but I'll reach out
Yeah.
to Kim Royer and see
Yeah,
who
who's
she
their
would suggest.
Yeah, who's the point person? If they probably would really love to do this stuff, but they don't necessarily have the advocates to
Mhm.
say like, you know, why don't you focus on 2 or 3 or 4 a year and, you know, and build the advocacy and make some really nice places and take care of those for us.
Right.
Yeah, and we could if there was a point person that we could coordinate with, we could probably scare up half a dozen or more volunteers to spend a day pulling invasives. I went up to Wallingford and did one with
You did.
Frank Hudson.
Yep. Yep.
Yeah, you could
Yeah,
have Barbary Day. You could have.
Yep. I've always had this idea that we need an invasives pull-up day, just like we have a green up day. That every
Yeah.
community will go out and every citizen will learn what those invasives are and be a part of solving that problem.
Yeah, and how to do it. And simplest way, the best. We know the poison stuff it's got to be professional and all, but
It does. Yeah.
it's also good exercise. It's good for you.
Well, I will follow up on that and figure out who that point person is.
Yeah, well, you know, if it
Thank
gets
you.
to the point that it needs to go to the legislature, I was there, I still have the relationships,
Mhm.
and probably could help find somebody to put a bill in.
Yeah.
That'd be great.
Just so long as it comes with some money.
Well, it's our money, it's how it gets spent.
Right.
Yes.
It's what are our priorities for a
Right.
better Vermont,
Uh-huh.
you know?
Okay. Well,
Thank you.
Well,
I
thanks
will-
all
yeah.
you guys for walking my land with me.
absolutely, Jock. Thanks for taking us on that tour.
You
Yeah,
bet.
that was wonderful. Thank you.
Very enjoyable. And if anybody wants any direct information on Tree Farm, I've given you my email there, or Jock, I don't know if we put your email in there.
No, but it's just jock.irons@gmail.
Okay.
And Jock, can you just give our very best to Jean for all of us?
Absolutely.
And tell her, you know, I think of her often myself, and probably a lot of folks here might know her.
Yeah, she's doing great.
Lovely lady, wonderful person.
Absolutely. Unlike the
Colleen,
men in
good
our
to see
family.
you.
Thank
Great.
you.
Well, thank you all.
All right,
Yeah,
thank
Kim,
you.
good to see you.
Good
Bye
to see
now.
you. Take care.
Yeah, take
Bye-bye.
care, my dear.
Good night.
Good night.
Night.